Welcome back to Project U 2.2. I'm Carrie, and today's episode is about overcoming life's hardest battles and finding the courage to reinvent yourself. I am truly honored to have a very special guest today, and I guarantee that today's conversation is one I know will stay with you long after you listen. My guest is Jennifer Boozer Stewart, a radio host from Alabama, an author, and an entrepreneur. Jennifer has faced unimaginable challenges from addiction recovery to personal loss, including the loss of her son and major career transitions. What stands out most isn't just what she's been through, but how she's chosen to live with courage, authenticity, and resilience. Jennifer, thank you for being here and for being willing to share your story with us today.
Thank you for having me. You got me a little bit choked up there listening to that. Thank
Oh,
you. It's an honor to be one of your first guests. I'm very excited.
you have faced, like I said, so many struggles that most people could barely imagine. And your story includes some incredibly hard chapters: losing your son, battle with addiction, and then choosing recovery. Can you take us back a little bit to what time was like back then and then what led you to that moment of change?
Well, I was 25 years old. I had a son that was not quite 2 years old. And when I went to give birth to my second child, I suffered a massive uterine rupture and bladder rupture that ultimately I should have died, and I didn't, thank God. But my perfectly healthy full term baby boy was born alive, but he was brain dead. And I had to not only physically recover and try to overcome those massive injuries myself, but I had to take my beautiful boy off of life support when he was 5 days old and bury him. And I don't think there are words in the English language sufficient enough to describe what that is like. To know that it was preventable, to know that it was negligence that allowed it to happen, and then know that the people responsible for that happening to us went on with their lives. I wore my bitterness and my anger and my righteous indignation like a badge of honor for a long time, and in the process of that, again, this is 2003. There was no opioid crisis. I was not even a drinker. I know my name is Boozer, but I wasn't even a drinker. And I started becoming dependent on the pain medicine. And I already had been dealing with chronic pain in my life long before that, migraine sufferer, things like that. And so the first time a doctor told me I was going through drug withdrawal, I was insulted. And funny enough, said I don't even smoke weed. And so, but it was too late by then. It numbed this scream that felt like it was constantly building. I knew I wasn't the only woman in the world who'd ever lost a child. I knew I wasn't the only woman in the world to ever experience a traumatic birth and, have those massive complications and things, but it felt like it. I didn't know anybody. Everybody around me, my sisters, my cousins, my friends from high school and college were all having babies. And nobody around me even knew how to deal with me. Grief is a hard thing, and when it comes to losing a child, it's the most unnatural grief that there is. You expect to lose your parents, your siblings, even your spouse, but you never ever can imagine yourself standing over a tiny 2 foot long casket with your precious child in it and watching it be lowered into the ground. It does something, it breaks something in you. And I lost my joy. And combined with the pain pills, that were depressing me and I couldn't sleep, it was a bad thing. And fast forward 10 years of that, I wanted to die. I fantasized about getting hit by a bus sometimes or getting a cancer diagnosis so at least no one would be mad at me and I could go away. I didn't want to think about the future because I didn't want one. I couldn't imagine it. I just couldn't imagine ever not feeling that way again. And and God delivered me from that. I got to the point where, my husband gave me an ultimatum and said, you need to get help or you need to move in with your mama, and I wasn't doing that. Coupled with the fact that she's 6 hours away, no, ma'am. I did that for 18 years. And so, I went through the steps to get clean. God came in and delivered me from that. I don't know if you're a believer or not, but I very much am. I've seen too much. I've experienced too much. And God has brought me out of too much for me not to give him all the credit for that. And suddenly I could start to see a future, and in the process of getting clean and learning how to live again and having a desire for human connection and making plans for the future, I started looking around at where God might use me, and I couldn't find anything. I didn't want to work with the youth group. I don't want to be a greeter at the church. Feeding the homeless, it sounds great, but there was just something I was looking for. And in that process, I discovered my calling, which was cannabis education. CBD was introduced to me. I rejected it at first, because of all the reasons people reject it, especially being in recovery. I was 3 years clean, still had chronic pain and all those things, but I had this zest for life back. And I wanted to be of service so badly. I was a stay-at-home mom for 17 years. And so, I needed something to do with myself besides, sitting around numbing out. And that's what I got. And boy, did I get it.
Mm.
And it kind of started me on this other path, but it was like night and day. My mom I used to call my mom and cry, and she would say, Jennifer, one day you're going to have such an amazing testimony. And I would cry and say, I don't want to have a good testimony. I just want to be normal. And I couldn't imagine being on the other side of that, wanting a life at all, but especially not in that place where you can look back on something and go, okay, I may not be happy with what happened. I would never choose to go back and do it again, but I see what you did there. I see what you did there. I see where I can take this terrible, horrible, depressing thing that just sucked everything out of me and turn around and to the next woman behind me and say, I know how you feel. I've been where you are. It does get better, and God sees you and He cares about you. And there is life after this gut wrenching thing, And of course, there are days, even now, my son should be 22 years old. And there are plenty of days where I catch my breath and go, okay, that really happened. His birthday is the hardest day of the year for me, and my body feels it coming for days. I get a heaviness in my chest and I get a sensitivity in my spirit, but I know if I just ride it out the next day I'll be fine, and I could not conceive of that 11 years ago. And it's funny that we're doing this interview now and talking about this because my clean anniversary 11 years is in 2 days. So we're
Mm.
getting ready to celebrate year 11. And that means that I have been clean now longer than I used. I've been set free longer than I was in bondage. And that's a massive, massive thing for me. Death, addiction, thoughts and desires turned into something like a ministry for me to reach out to other people who are hurting, in so many ways, not just with their physical pain or, I had insomnia for 14 years. I didn't sleep through the night for 14 years. That's crazy to me. And now I get to help people get back to those things and take their health back and take their mental health back, because without that, you have nothing. Nothing else matters if you can't live inside your own head and face your own heart. So, Yeah, I mean, was a terrible time, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, not even the people that did it, that put me there,
I
I wouldn't wish
actually
it on anyone.
that's a dark, very challenging, heavy season to go through, and I wanna talk about that last statement that you just said because that resonated with me earlier when you talked about how other people could have prevented that from happening, and when you carry the heaviness of blame, and you said that you carried it like a badge of honor. How do you work past that? Because that's truly when you can work past that and let that go, that lets yourself
Yes,
open up.
bitterness and the inability to forgive is a prison for you. And I don't know what the magic formula is. I still have to ask, how do I forgive? How do I let this go? And I am not at all there 100%. There are days that the anger wells up, and when I think about, somebody that I care about who's about to have a baby, all of those feelings and those fears for them, just a few minutes ago, I was thinking about what we might talk about. And I have a son, my oldest son is 24 and he's married, and they want to start having children next year, maybe. And, thinking about all of the ways that that could go wrong, and not allowing myself to focus on that because of what I went through, because it could happen to any of us. But forgiveness is the big one. I had to let go of my right to get any justice. I had to let go of my right to make them pay for what they did. And I had to let go of it. In the process, for me, I was about 3 weeks clean, and that is a scary place to be after 10 years. And I was preparing, to possibly go to rehab. And I went to hear an evangelist speak at my church. And at the end of the sermon, he said, "I want to pray for everybody here that needs healing." He said, so I went up there, and he's standing in front of me, above me, and says, "But first, I want to pray for people who are dealing with bitterness." And he jumped down off the stage, looked me dead in the eye, and he said, "That is you." And I was like, that is me. And in the process of praying for me, he said, and all he said was, "Tell me what happened." All I said was, "My son died." Didn't tell him how, who, when, where, what, nothing. And as he prayed for me, he said, "The people who are responsible for your son's death, you don't need anything from them. You don't need an apology. You don't need a dime of their money. You just need to ask God to let your heart go free and forgive them." And that did something to me. He said, it's godly to mourn, but it's ungodly to mourn forever. And
Hmm.
I was that just whoo, man. And I went home that day, and it just like 1,000 pound weight lifted off of me. Like I knew I could do this. I knew I could be clean and stay clean. I knew that I could get past this terrible, terrible point in my life that was ruining everything. And I knew that I could overcome it, and that God was not going to let me go down without a fight, and that started everything for me. And I immediately started reconnecting with family members and friends and just my children, and trying to kind of fight for the life I had sort of let slip through my fingers. And I was a suburban drug addict, mom popping pills in the minivan on the way to private school pickup line, and a lot of people maybe didn't even know, but man, of course, that's what we tell ourselves, is that nobody knows.
Right, yes. Well, I
We
think you nailed it, Jen, when you said that you still have moments where you fight through that
absolutely.
forgiveness, and I think that so with so many challenges in life, we and as a former math teacher, I have to speak in math terms because we want that growth and that forgiveness to happen exponentially or linear, and it just doesn't. It is
Right.
full of that ugly, messy middle part that we have to continue to climb through, and that, you get a little bit higher on that mountaintop as you continue to make progress, but it's a battle.
It is, and I ended up, when I come across people in life, through my business, through my radio show, who have gone through a similar loss of a child. Like I said, there's a connection there, and I've been able to stop what I'm doing, come around the counter at my store, embrace someone I've never met before, and cry with them because we don't have to explain ourselves to each other. And I think that human connection part, especially in this day and age, we're so disconnected as humans. Technology was supposed to connect us and it's now kind of isolated all of us. So when you have an opportunity to connect with another human being who, just by looking them in the eye and saying, "Me too," and they understand, and you can unburden yourself without saying a word, and people need that. It's a desperation that you feel, and you don't even realize until you have a chance to unburden for a while how heavy it has been. It feels strange. It's like, changing out of heavy boots to being barefoot. You're like, wow, I was being weighed down by this thing, and I'm so used to the weight of it that it felt normal to me. And in those moments, when you get to say, I have been where you are, and I am so sorry, and you don't have to find the words because I already know.
What
And
a
and
blessing you are to so many people, even strangers, and the blessing is that you see them without them having to say anything. You see right through the pain in their eyes and can connect with them. What would you say for any listeners who are going through some addiction themselves, grief, and even grief over losing a child or just overwhelming challenges? What role did faith or your mindset or community play in helping you heal?
Well, first, I would say that whether or not you are a believer, God loves you and He cares about your future and your pain. And I would first suggest pray. And when I was angry with God, that was another component. I've been a believer all my life, but in that, I prayed for my son to be miraculously delivered over those 5 days when he was alive. And I fully believed with all my heart that that was going to happen, and it didn't. And that was a part of my bitterness. It wasn't just toward the medical staff and the people who were supposed to be taking care of us. I was angry at God. And how silly is that? Because who am I? Who am I? And so part of that was remembering that God loves me, and he doesn't do anything to harm me. And that even the hard things in life, because God didn't cause my son to die. Somebody who was negligent and proud and didn't care and wasn't doing their job caused this. It wasn't God, but God can redeem any situation. I don't care whether or not you know that I was a drug addict, and I don't sugarcoat it. I used to, you know, but I don't sugarcoat it. I am not I am not a drug addict today. That is not true for me, and I won't go to a meeting and stand up and say my name is Jennifer and I'm a drug addict, because that's not true. But God cares about the minutia of your life, and if you want to be set free from those things, there's always a component of anger and a need to understand and make it make sense. And that is me. I am a sucker for some justice. I want to understand it. I want to know why, and I want to make it right. And that's the way I'm built. And none of that computed with me in that situation. But I can now see where now God has given me the opportunity to love my neighbor, the ones who are hurting the most. It's easy to love people that love you back and don't ask much of you. It's the people like I was, who are bitter, who are miserable to be around because they're so hurt, or who are so far outside of themselves due to mental illness or addiction, and all of those factors, or grief, to give them grace, because I can see, even though you're a mess, I was a mess too. I was a mess. I mean, a mess. And I was in denial, and prayer and compassion. Find people around you who have been where you are. Ask them how do they cope. Ask them to be accountability partners, to check on you and you check on them. Relationships are give and take. Show up, and then do whatever you can to use your testimony when you get over the hump. Do whatever you can to use your testimony to help the people around you, because there are so many more people hurting and lost and broken and in those chains of addiction that need one person to say, I see you. That's what we all want. We all want to be seen, and we all, deep down, even the greediest of us and the most power hungry people, at some point, there was a part of them that wanted to be of service. Those are the things that feed the soul. Stop with all the superficial stuff and do things that matter. That does so much for me. It does so much for me to look at someone and say, I see you struggling. Even if you won't admit to me you're taking pain pills and it's out of control, I can see it on you. I can sense it. Let me tell you my story.
Mhm. I think so often,
And then they're willing to
unfortunately,
share theirs and be honest. You have to be honest with yourself and the people around you.
the human part of us, I think it takes something not as tragic as what you have gone through, but something, that low point in our lives when we really see and feel the presence of God, and know that that's our only way out, that we have to rely on him and help, he helps us pull through those. And
Yeah.
I appreciate your courage. It's so hard to be real, but I really loved what you said when you get on the other side, or you're about to go over the, and I don't know if there is ever another side of what you've been through, but as you cross over that big, that big mountain that you
Right.
can reach over and then help others, and just to be so real and so vulnerable, that it takes so much courage.
Well, I mean, it helps me though. Every time I get to talk about it, because I want to talk about my son. He lived, he was a part of me. Excuse me. Um, he lived and he died and he existed, and I love him. Even if no one remembers him, I love him. And everything about his birth and death has shaped every part of my life since then. Just like my living children shape my life and who I am, the decisions that I make. Every Christmas, it takes me a while to get going on it, even as far removed as I am. And then the last few days before Christmas, I can go, okay, shake it off. This is good. But there's always that moment on Christmas morning where I'm looking and I'm so grateful for the children that I have and how healthy and beautiful and smart they are. And I and I wonder, what would he look like? Would he have played football like his brother, or played the saxophone, or done robotics? Who knows? Would he be tall? Would he be funny? Would he look more like his father or like me? Those things still exist. All those things you wonder when they're in your belly. You don't ever get answers to that, and it still, it does affect me. But I know that if my son could talk to me, he would say, Mama, please don't waste your life being sad because I'm not here. Don't deprive my brother and my sister of the mother that you are because you miss me. Don't make your life lesser or smaller because you can't get over this. The one thing I wish most for my children is that they would know God and spend eternity with God. And I don't have to worry about that for one of them. I don't have to worry about that. And that brings me comfort. There's nothing I could do to change it. You have to learn to live with it. You don't have to be happy about it, but you can be happy.
Could we honor him by sharing his name and his birthday?
Yes, his name was
Mhm.
Elijah Maximus Boozer. He was born June 13th, 2003, and he died June 17th, 2003.
Elijah. Was the middle name Maximus, was that after anyone in your family?
Well, my first son is Isaiah Alexander, and so I love the name Elijah. My ex-husband's name is Joshua. His dad was James. My dad was David. We love the biblical boy names.
Love
So
that.
I loved Elijah, and this is really silly, but we were watching the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. And I love Maximus Aurelius. I just love Maximus. I love the name Max, and I'm like, well, it has to be a regular name. We had a Maxwell in the family. So I said, what about Maximus? And then I thought, well, Isaiah's middle name is Alexander. So they have Hebrew first names and gladiator middle names.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
June 13th. That's a very special, yes, special day.
Yes.
So
Yes.
talk about when life you talked about some days when you just wish you didn't exist. So when life felt that tough, that impossible, what kept you showing up for yourself?
I was showing up purely for my children, honestly, on those days. I wanted to die. I fantasized about it, but I did not have the heart to abandon my children and have them grow up thinking that I didn't care enough about them to just exist. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I didn't, because what a life I've had since then. And not having been able to witness these two people be, grown into adults. My youngest is 18 and about to graduate from high school, and, be a part of their lives and know them as adults. I can't imagine the damage that would have done to them. And I'm so glad that I was too chicken to do it sometimes. And I'm so glad that, there were a lot of days I might have accidentally died. Opiates will kill you quick. And I probably should have on occasion. And, thankfully, but God. And, it's funny. It's almost like talking about someone I knew in high school. It's like, was that really me? That was me. I was as low as I can imagine being. And now, I love my life. Even with the current disastrous things with my business and my career and the fighting I'm having to do against the whole government, all of them. Alabama, the federal government, everybody fighting for the people around me who deserve better, who deserve access to cannabis medicine, because I've seen it change people's lives just like it changed mine. And I'm just not, I don't know what happened to my fight then, but it was there, obviously keeping me alive. And when I stopped needing it to keep me alive, baby, I came out swinging.
I think it is so important, like you said, to find that purpose,
Hmm.
to keep pushing forward. And Jen is talking about some legal changes right now with cannabis in her state of Alabama and dealing with her personal business.
Hmm.
Um, Going back to, you've been sober for 11 years and 2 days, you said, right? It's your
Hmm.
11-year anniversary. So,
Halloween of all
yeah.
days.
Oh, yeah, love that.
Hmm.
So, talk about staying sober and some maybe strategies that helped you stay grounded, because I'm sure that wasn't linear, or that was
Not
cold
at all.
turkey or easy. So just maybe
Right.
share a few daily habits for people who might be struggling.
Well, I had to start reconnecting with people. I actually started going to celebrate recovery meetings. And for anybody who's not familiar with CR, it's kind of like NA, the 12 steps, but they incorporate it with the Beatitudes from the Bible. So it's more like 26 things, but they teach you not only what the 12 steps, it goes a lot more into, your creator and connecting with God and dealing with learning how to be kind, learning how to be patient, learning how to forgive yourself, things like that. And I started going to these meetings, and I met people like me, just like, I was saying I am now reaching back. I met people who were a year clean, or 6 months, or 6 weeks more than me, and I could go, because you forget how to be human. You got to remember, I didn't work. I was home alone all day by myself while my kids were at school and my husband was at work. I was incredibly isolated. So going to those meetings pushed me kind of back into the world, but in a way that felt safe to me, because I knew no one in these rooms is going to judge me. They're going to take me at face value. Again, that's what we want, to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be given an opportunity to present ourselves the way we are now and not be judged. Shame, you can't do it. You cannot live with shame. You have to forgive yourself first. I will never forget, I told my ex husband, I said, I have so many regrets about the last 10 years, but I refuse. I cannot live in shame. It will drive me right back to where I was. It will keep me down in that dark pit and that dark hole. I have to be able to forgive myself, and I fully intend to make amends and do all the things, and you will never see me like that again. But I cannot have it dragged behind me like a ball and chain, and that is a huge thing. Those people in the meetings, I didn't have to feel shame, and I would sit there and listen to stories way wilder, longer, and way darker than mine, and think, oh my gosh, I'm over here just crying in my Cheerios, and these people are 10 times worse off. I never went to jail. I never even set foot in a rehab. I never was homeless. I lived in a middle class suburban neighborhood and drove a Honda minivan with a sunroof and I mean, like, I had a totally normal life, but I was on pills and just completely emotionally disconnected. So being plugged in with people that you can relate to and connect to, having a sponsor or a mentor makes so much sense, because you will get bogged down in the mental battle, and the devil will come in there and say, you should be ashamed. Look at all the things you've done. How could your family ever forgive you? How could you ever try to get on public radio and make something of yourself and stand up and tell people how to get off drugs? You were on drugs, and you have to learn how to, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff as far as your thinking goes, and get rid of the stinking thinking, and try to, ground yourself. I recommend reading your Bible and praying. Connect with people who have a strong faith, like I said, who have been there. People in recovery are the coolest, kindest, most generous, least judgmental people on the planet. It doesn't matter what you did in your addiction, they are going to love you. And, recovering addicts are some of the best friends you'll ever have. And they have the most joy because they've been to that pit and come out of it, where so many people haven't. And their rock bottom is truly on death's door. And some of them have died and been revived. So, get into a community, whether it's a grief counseling group, or an addiction recovery group, any type of thing that you're dealing with. And just so you know, Celebrate Recovery, you can go there for shopping addiction, anger management issues, sex and love addiction, all sorts of things. And you can go as a family member of someone dealing with that, because some people's really hard thing is watching their child become an addict, or being married to, or the child of an addict. And there are people out there who know where you've been, where you are, and how to get you where you want to be.
Wise words. I think so often when we go through any difficult time, the shame, and you can wallow in that, and you can do all the negative self talk, and you can get stuck there. So I think you're exactly right to when you said you were going to push that aside and couldn't quite deal with it then, or you would have gotten stuck there.
Right.
If we fast forward, you said you were a stay-at-home mom for 17 years. So many people are stuck in a career that they don't love, that doesn't bring them joy, but they're too scared to follow their heart because it's hard.
It
So,
is.
what gave you the courage after you've been through all of this to take that first step to become a business owner? Like, how did you overcome the fear of just starting something new?
Well, so like I said, I tried CBD and it changed my life. I started sleeping through the night. I had less joint pain and didn't have to be high. I had so many benefits from it, and I couldn't explain it to my mom, who was a 30-year kindergarten teacher, again, below the Bible Belt, the DARE program, all the things. And I went to elementary school in the 80s, so I'm sure you know what I mean. But, all of these preconceived ideas, I couldn't explain it to my mother without her worried I was going to relapse. I was 3 years clean at this point. And so I started learning about it so that I could teach it to her. And I became in fact just completely fascinated because what I was learning was the total opposite of what I had always been told. And it just put a fire in my belly. And God gave me the name Cannabama, and that's the name of my business is Cannabama. And put this fire in my belly and gave me a vision. And I intrinsically knew that if I could teach enough people what I was taught my mom, who now won't leave the house without her CBD pain roller and her tincture twice a day, by the way, at 66. Um, and she's not on pain medicine and blood pressure medicine and sleep medicine and all the things that most people her age are on. Beyond that, I just knew if I could teach other people that same way, that I could help them change their own lives the way it had changed mine. And that's how Cannabama was born. I went from being a stay-at-home mom to opening the first legal hemp dispensary in the state of Alabama, and started teaching classes, free classes, where people could come and ask me questions, try a sample, learn some information and make it less scary. And turns out everybody else thought that was a great idea too. And within less than a year, I had two locations, and the local talk radio station came to me and offered me a 1 hour talk radio show every week about CBD, hemp, cannabis, all the things. And that was over 6 years ago. I've been on a live FM radio, no other program like it in the country, for over 6 years. And the first episode, I said, "My name is Jennifer. I own Cannabama in downtown Mobile, Alabama. And I was 4 years, 6 months clean from pain pills. That's the worst thing you can know about me. I am not ashamed. And now that you know you can trust me, let's talk about it, because I knew they could trust me and the information I had, but I was going to be punching against all of their preconceived ideas and 80 something, almost 90 years of very good propaganda. And so I wanted them to fast track that knowledge of, well, if she'll tell me she's a drug addict, up front, then what could she possibly want to hide? And that made people sit up and listen.
What did you learn about trusting yourself through that adventure?
Wow, well, that's a whole topic. In all of these transitions, I did learn to trust myself because I had no experience. I had a half of a music education degree from the 90s that wasn't worth, anything. And, no job experience or anything. But when it immediately started changing lives around me in a domino effect, I knew this is my kingdom work. I get it now, God. I get it. I had $5,000. I had a partner that, oh my goodness, thank God it only took me a year to get out of that. That's harder to get out of than a marriage. I've done both. But turns out he wasn't quite the fan of Cannabama that I was. But it gave me the means to make that choice and do something different. but that's another big life transition. But, I started being confident in the fact that, yeah, I can do this because I was doing it every single day. And every day I got a little glimpse of something else that told me I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I didn't get it all right. I did not get it all right. And I faced every obstacle. I can't advertise on social media. I've lost more social media pages than you can shake a stick at. You have opposition on every side, including the pharmaceutical industry and now the alcohol industry and all sorts of things. But it was worth it because every single day I got to see lives changed. And so, it's funny because in the loss of my business and the fighting of legislation that ultimately we lost this past year, I got to the point where the losses kept coming so hard and so fast and so often that I started doubting myself again, and it felt like no matter what decision I make, it's going to blow up in my face because that's what was happening. And you get a little nutty, and I did. I lost my business, but I know that I know that I know that I'm still doing the right thing. I haven't had an income in 4 months, and I got married 3 days before the store closed. So it's been an interesting honeymoon period.
Mhm.
I
It is
think.
interesting. I think some people forget and they look at people like you who, you use humor to get
Mhm.
through some of your grief and
Absolutely.
I love that. But they forget that it's still no matter how much you've gone through, life can still throw blows at you. You still
Mhm.
have that imposter syndrome where you're like, am
Oh,
I
yes.
capable to
So
deal with
bad,
it?
so bad, especially when it comes to, like, my show and things like that. It was one thing to teach people in small groups within the confines of my store where they already knew and trusted me, but to get out on the radio and talk to people I would never see, tens of thousands of them, and hope that it resonates and people don't laugh at me. And there's a lot of people within my industry, in my state, whose businesses and livelihoods directly benefit from me teaching the people of Alabama what it is and what it does and all that good stuff, that refuse to support. There are people that will take advantage of every opportunity to come on the show and promote themselves. And I've never been paid for what I do, not
Mm,
one penny.
mm,
So I do it because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's where I trust myself. And it's not just that I trust myself, it's that I trust God. And until He tells me it's time to pack it up and go home, I'm going to keep swinging. And there's days where I want to lay on the floor in the fetal position and say, I give up. But then 10 minutes later, I'm like, okay, what's next? Because no, you're not going to take me down that easy.
mm.
I have lived through worse than this. I've survived 100% of the days been thrown at me.
Mhm. We all get in our own heads and we get
Mhm.
stuck, or we get afraid. So for someone who is going through maybe a divorce or the end of a relationship or the loss of a child or the loss of a job, they're just stuck and it's hard to think about starting over. One piece of advice.
Get over yourself. Honestly, get out of your head. Get over yourself. Go do something for someone else who doesn't have your problems, whose problems are much bigger than yours, whose life is much harder than yours. Find joy in those things and figure out who you are now. I am not the woman I was at 25. That woman is dead and gone and in the hole with her son. I am not who I was the day that I came out of addiction and started life anew. I'm not the woman that I am certainly not the woman I was the day I filed for divorce. That's a whole other podcast.
Mm. I love
So
that. Just looking through a different lens
yeah,
is sometimes so yeah, that's great advice because people you can always find someone who's had it worse and they have survived.
right, right. And
Mhm.
to me, the purest form of self-love that you can give is to shut off your head, stop worrying about what's happening to me right now in this moment and freaking out about it, and look outside of yourself. Do something for someone else, because the gratitude, and even if they never know it was you and never say thank you, you did something good. Your life still has value. It inspires you, and you start to, well, how can I get that feeling again? Well, I'll go out and, you know, there's two laws in the Bible that really matter: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit, and love your neighbor as yourself. And everybody's our neighbor. And so you've got to quit focusing on, if I let myself focus on my ex-husband and that 20 years, honey, I'd be in a straitjacket. I would not be you. You could find me rocking back and forth in a padded room. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. You know?
I really wish I was half as witty as you are and how you just come up with these great visuals. They're
Well,
fabulous.
I'm a visionary, so I think in vision. That's how I think. And it's funny because my mom's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my aunts, all my family are teachers, and my mom couldn't understand why I didn't want to be a teacher. And turns out I am a teacher. I just don't teach little kids in a classroom. I teach people how to change their lives. I teach people about plant medicine. I teach people about why these things happen to them, and how to do something about it outside of this lie we've been sold. This one size fits all canned medicine that the cost is keeping us from being able to feed our families practically. And that to me is so valuable. It changed everything for me. And to be able to change someone else's life for the better, bro, come on. Come on. I would never, like I said, I would never say, okay, God, let me go through that again. Or I'm glad that that happened. I will never say that. But since it happened, and I don't have a choice in the matter, and since I still have breath in my lungs and some years left in my life, why not do something with it? Why not make it matter in a way that helps other people? Because at the end of the day, every time I sacrifice that, I got emotional. I'm telling this story. It's hard for me to think about these things at certain times, but one person, at least one person, will hear this, and it will resonate with them, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy for that. And
So
I think
let's
that service, to me, service is where it's at.
So, thinking about listeners and this episode resonating with someone, and maybe it's one of your own kids someday or a grandkid that hears this. The one thing in life you've shared so much already, but one last thing that your story you could use to remind people of.
Never, ever, 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 ever give up. I don't know how to say it any more eloquently than that. Life is beautiful even in its darkest points, because everything has a purpose. And I hate when people say everything happens for a reason and all these cliche things, but there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. And I guess one of my favorite scriptures talks about how God will use everything for the good of those who love him, even the things we think will break us. If we can just find a way to endure, find a way to serve others, to love ourselves and give ourselves grace, forgive ourselves, and forgive whatever it is, including God. If you think, like I did, like a crazy person, that you have a right to be angry with God, I get it. I've been there. Let it go. Let it go, because it's going to drag you down under with it.
Listening to your stories just it's amazing to me how so much pain can turn into such a greater purpose when you're willing to face it and share it with other people. So I appreciate all of your stories, your realness. Is there anything else that you have before we wrap this up?
I would just say that again, there's nothing that you cannot overcome as a human being. And, look to God for everything, and look to the people around you. Like I said, there's either someone who's been where you are that can help pull you out, or there's someone who is where you used to be that needs your help. And in both of those relationships are priceless. and just give the people around you the grace and forgiveness that you want for yourself.
Grace, I love that word. Giving yourself grace too
Mhm.
sometimes when you're
Yep.
beating yourself up and all of the negative self-talk. Jennifer, your stories are nothing short of inspiring, and I am so grateful for you being willing to share your story and for just reminding us what courage looks like
Thank
because
you.
you are one courageous Alabama mama. And the resilience, your reinvention, never giving up on yourself are inspiring. So, for anyone listening, just remember that no matter how hard life gets, like Jennifer shared, just no matter how broken you may feel, no matter how broken your life feels, that it's possible to reclaim your power, to
Mhm.
embrace change, and to step into your next chapter. So, if people want to learn more about you or to follow your work, where can they find you, Jennifer?
You can find me on social media, Jennifer Boozer Stewart. And if you're interested in what I do, you can look up, Google Sweet Home Canabama. That's my radio show and YouTube page. And yeah, that's where you can find me on just about any social media outlet, either by the radio name or by my name, and canabama.com.
Awesome. If today's episode spoke to you, share it with a friend who might need a little reminder that reinvention is always possible. And remember that your next chapter is waiting for you. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having
Mm.
me and giving me an opportunity to share my story once again.
Yay! Good job. That was awesome.
Yeah,
So
that wasn't that
awesome.
hard.
That was awesome. Now I'm just going to pray that that recording worked because you were phenomenal.